We're with Brendan Nottle, Major Brendan Nottle from the Salvation Army in Melbourne. Thank you for joining us on our Supernal Magazine video series. It is Homelessness Week.
Yep.
It's a big week for a whole lot of people, including the Salvation Army. Can you explain a little bit about why we need a week to talk about homelessness?
Yep. I think homelessness is one of those issues that a whole range of people just tend to forget. And I think having a week actually not only raises the issue into the public consciousness, but what it also does is creates opportunity for education, because there's often a lot of stereotypical views that are held around the issue. And Homelessness Week gives us the opportunity to explore some of those and perhaps get rid of some of the myths.
Yep. And what would be some of the myths?
Well, I think the old chestnut is the one that says that a person that is homeless is there through their own fault. A person that is homeless is there because they're lazy. All a person needs to do is get a job and get on their feet and they'll be fine again. And when you actually sit down and speak with people that are homeless, you start to understand that there are often a whole range of complex drivers for their homelessness, and they require a whole range of supports to be able to resolve some of those. And I think when you have conversation with people that are homeless, you actually walk away almost with a sense of awe, because they're able to keep going. And I think those conversations actually cause an attitude of judgment to disappear very quickly.
I think that judgment thing is just horrendous, because most people just judge, and without actually wanting to understand why someone's in that situation.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we've seen over the past couple of years, particularly Melburnians are really wanting to understand the issue more, and they're wanting to help. And I think there's certainly been a significant shift in the psyche of Melburnians towards the issue of homelessness, but we've got to keep working on that as well.
Yeah, well, which is, I think, again, that education is very important. So
Yep.
I think it's good. I'd like if you could explain the difference between rough sleeping and homelessness. It's because there is a difference.
Yeah, Bureau of Statistics run 3 categories around homelessness. So there's primary homelessness, secondary and tertiary homelessness. So primary homelessness is fundamentally rough sleeping. Secondary homelessness is shelter, but it's very, very temporary, and people are uncertain about where they'll be staying in the near future. Tertiary homelessness has a little bit more longevity to it, but it's still uncertain. It's not permanent housing.
Yeah, and there is I guess there's a lot of people fall into that category because they go from sleeping, at people's places. They don't know where it's going to be. They might get a short-term accommodation, but there's nothing to that afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. And there are people that stay in rooming houses, and it's a week-by-week proposition, and there's no contract in place, no agreement, and that could end at any time. So people's tenure in their homelessness is very uncertain, and that's where they fit into that category of tertiary homelessness.
Do you find when people are like that their mental health suffers a lot through depression, that sort of stuff?
It's really interesting, because we started a homeless program here a number of years ago, and we quite intensively surveyed the first 52 people that came through that program to understand where they came from and what the drivers were for their homelessness. And of that first 52 people, they all indicated that they'd experienced some form of abuse in their childhood, particularly between the ages of 8 and 15, and that abuse had caused varying levels of trauma for them. And in all of those cases, that trauma hadn't been addressed. And so often what happens, not just with that particular group, but with people that are homeless in general, is if they experience trauma and it's not treated, it can develop into quite a serious mental health issue. And then again, if that goes untreated, people tend to self-medicate. So they'll either get hold of prescription drugs and abuse those, or they'll abuse illicit drugs.
The work that you're doing, we talked a little bit earlier, and you're talking about the cafe that you have here.
Yep.
Could you explain what happens around the cafe, so that if people do find themselves in trouble, where they can go?
Yeah, sure. So the cafe operates at 69 Burke Street in Melbourne, in the city, and the cafe's open 22 hours a day. So it operates from 7 a.m. through till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's an opportunity for people to come and access a meal. So we see about 120, 130 people for breakfast, anywhere from 150 to 200 for lunch. But it's not just about meals, it's also about community. So there's often an issue with people that we see coming into the cafe where they're very isolated and lonely. So it's about trying to address that issue by building a sense of community. I think what we also do is offer a range of services. So St Vincent's Hospital have been brilliant in the way that they supply nurses and a mental health worker here in this place. We've got housing workers that are available to work with people, both from our agency, our organisation, but other agencies as well. So that helps people get back on their feet. Co-Health, they provide a GP once a fortnight, comes in here. We see a Centrelink worker in here as well. So there's a whole range of supports that are available to people to help get them back on their feet again. Then at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we clean up each day, and then we reopen at 4 p.m. and that becomes our Twilight Cafe. That runs through till 11 p.m. 7 nights a week, and we're seeing between 150 and 180 people for dinner. But also there's a whole range of other activities that take place during that cafe as well. So it's again about sort of breaking down those barriers that cause people to be socially isolated. About 10:30, 11:15, we move some of the furniture out in the cafe 7 nights a week, and we see anywhere from 160 to 180 people come into the cafe for the night that would otherwise be out on the streets and exposed to the elements and sometimes exposed to violence. Yep.
Yeah, well, and that's a very real thing, isn't it? Living on the street.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's happening a lot, and probably way too much. In running the cafe, you mentioned also that my story is about the changing face of homelessness.
Yep.
So you're starting to see a lot more women and children come through, and that figure sort of blew me away a bit. Can talk about the figures between that side of things. Yeah.
So as part of our response to homelessness, we've partnered with the Collingwood Football Club. So we've got 46 houses that are in Collingwood's name, and Collingwood furnish the houses. We provide caseworkers that support those people in that housing. So we've currently got, it's 120 people in that housing program, and it's a long-term housing option. So when we first started the program about 5 years ago, people would stay for about 2 weeks and then they'd leave. Now the average length of stay is 370 days. So there's been a significant turnaround, and I think that's often due to the work that's done by the caseworkers. Mm-hmm. In that program, we see about 30 children as well, and that's a really new phenomenon for us. So over the past, up until a couple of years ago, most of the people that we saw in that program were middle-aged men, and a couple of years ago we saw a gradual, and now it's become a more significant shift, where of the 46 houses, 23 of those are occupied by women that have escaped violent situations at home, and they've often gone to family and friends for support, which has been great, but that's dried up over time and they've ended up with no options. So we've got 23 of the houses with women in them, and as I mentioned before, 30 children.
And the women, when they come in, do they have children with them a lot
yes,
of the
that's
time?
right, yeah.
Yep. So they're not only getting out to save themselves, they're obviously getting out to stop violence against children.
Absolutely. And I think the children are often the main driver for women getting out of the houses. That's what we've seen with the women that are in our program.
We were talking about the sort of the Indigenous population growing here in Melbourne in this same situation. Yep. So how do you find that happening? Because originally you were dealing with predominantly white men in their 40s to their 60s.
Yep. So, that's the really interesting thing about the cafe here is it's quite a dynamic environment in the sense that the people that come in, or the type of people that come in, shift. So at the moment, as you mentioned, we see 50 to 60 Indigenous people. They often come at night, and last year at this time we were seeing 8 to 12. So that's a significant shift that we didn't see coming. Yep. We also see now 60 to 70 elderly Chinese people here every day. So they're not homeless. They're often in public housing, but they're very isolated. So their driver for coming here is they just want to connect with other people.
Yeah. So it is really, what you're really doing is creating a community for anyone to come and be involved in if they want to, their choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we try to do with that community is make it as real as possible. So we've got lots of different people volunteering that come in and get involved as well. So they'll work under the direction of our staff. We've got 31 staff, but we've actually got 1,000 active volunteers, and once a month we run a volunteer information night. Last Wednesday night we had 100 people turn up to that. So
wow, okay.
I think that demonstrates the goodwill that's evident amongst a whole range of people in Melbourne. But it's really important for us because it does two things. Obviously, the volunteers are additional practical help around the cafe, but what it does is broadens the type of people that are accessing the cafe and broadens the type of people that homeless people have access to as well. So they're not just hanging out with their own cohort, they're engaging with people from different backgrounds, which we think is really important.
What a brilliant idea. And I would assume that people will be able to get in touch with all of that information on the website?
Yep.
So okay, so I'll make sure there's a link posted to the website so that people can follow up on it. The other thing I thought was interesting, we talked about state and federal government and getting above politics for a lot of homelessness. But you were really hot on Melbourne City Council, I think, doing a lot of work with you guys.
Yeah, I think the City of Melbourne have done some really good work around funding our night cafe. I think they're exploring some strategic options as well at the moment in terms of, is there an opportunity for them to create some accommodation for people that are sleeping rough? I think kudos to them for the work that they're doing. I think the state government here in Victoria, particularly over the past few years, has worked really hard in trying to develop further housing options for people that are sleeping rough. And I think what we'd really like to see is, at a national level, a plan develop that actually starts to address homelessness in a much more coordinated fashion. The reality is, in the City of Melbourne, we're not going to end homelessness. We're basically the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff that picks up the pieces, and we do what we can to help get people back on their feet. But often what happens here is you get one person off the street, get them into accommodation with support, and then another person appears very quickly to replace them on the street.
When you bring people in and you talked about their surveys, and we talked about women and domestic violence and children, and now we're seeing the Indigenous people coming in greater numbers, is there a general driver? Is there a general thing like that is mental health driven, or is it loss of job? Is it loss of family? I mean, you see in the media, people are choosing to live that life, and they've got wealthy families. They've just walked away from them. I mean, what are you finding as your rule of thumb?
Probably the predominant issue for us is a distinct lack of affordable housing. So in metropolitan Melbourne, the rental vacancy rates, and this is on the REIV website, are running at 2.3%. In regional rural Victoria, they're running at 1.3%. And there are some communities and regional areas in Victoria where vacancy rates are running at 0.7%. So I think when you look at that situation and you start to think about a situation that we experienced where we're looking for, so it's a Salvation Army with Collingwood Football Club, so we're pretty good tenants. You know, we're going to pay the rent, we're going to maintain the properties and so forth, and we're going to look after the residents. But we're finding it really difficult to find houses so that we can rent them and grow the Magpie Nest housing program. So we actually went out to Melton to look at a couple of 3-bedroom family homes, and they were pretty ordinary, but there were 30 people at each rental inspection. And that was a really interesting insight for us. So people tend to want to partner with us, you know, when it comes to renting properties, but gosh, it's incredibly hard for us and Collingwood Football Club, and I just feel for mum with a couple of kids that's really struggling to make ends meet to actually get into a rental property. And you think about, you know, 2 people turn up, want to rent a property together, both got good incomes, both got good rental history, got good references, may be able to pay a little bit more than the public price that's being presented around the weekly rent. And their competition is somebody that has no rental history or not great rental history, no references, and they're battling to make ends meet. So it makes it incredibly difficult. And our understanding is that at the moment in Victoria, the waiting list for public housing is sitting at 80,000 people. So a lack of affordable housing it's a huge issue.
And words of wisdom that comes from Major Brendan Nottle when it comes to people and what they've got to choose or do.
I think probably the first thing is don't judge. It's really easy to look at people that are sleeping rough or people that are homeless, going from family or friends member's house to family or friend member's house, and it's very, very easy to sit back and judge. But what we'd encourage you to do is actually, where appropriate, have a conversation with a person that's homeless and understand their story. And I think when you take time to have conversation and to actually treat a person that's homeless as a human being, which they are, then it fundamentally shifts our opinion from one of judgment to, I think for me, a sense of awe, where you say, I'm sort of staggered that this person can actually keep going in spite of all of the obstacles that have been thrown on their path to help that prevent them from actually getting on their feet.
Yeah, good advice, I think, and very much in line with what we believe in, and that's non-judgmental.
Yeah,
Just don't judge people for because you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, thank you very much for your time and effort in talking about it today. So thank you very, very much.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming in.